The White House is pushing back against rumors of dysfunction between the vice president's and president's offices. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters Monday President Joe Biden relies on Vice President Kamala Harris for a number of things, including her advice and counsel. However, at least two recent reports say staffers for the vice president worry she is being sidelined and constrained politically. And White House staffers paint a picture of dysfunction in her office. To talk more about this, I'd like to bring in CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Joel Payne. Hi, Joel. Great to see you. So first off, let's put this in perspective. How unusual are reports of problems between the president's and vice president's offices?
Not unusual at all. It's as normal as a West Wing storyline, a president and a vice president not getting along to some degree. And I don't think that's actually exactly what we're talking about here. I think by all reports, President Biden and Vice President Harris have a good relationship. I think there's always going to be staff tension. Let's look no further than the last Democratic president, President Obama, and then Vice President Biden. There were reports of staff dissension at that point. There's also a feeling that those two men had a good, warm relationship. And I think that that's still the sentiment here. I think what's going on is that there has been some challenge with branding Vice President Harris as a part of this administration. And it's a common challenge because the vice president is this, obviously, someone who is there to serve the role of the president if the president is incapacitated. But there's really no formal role outside of presiding over Senate votes and being an emissary, a high-level surrogate for the president. And so there's a common difficulty here. I think what's different in this scenario is we have a historic vice president. She's doing an audacious thing. This is the first woman, first black and Indian woman to do this. And it's not surprising that there will be challenges with again, landing this plane of what is her public role as a part of this administration.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I wonder whether you think that these reports get more attention or are perhaps magnified because Vice President Harris is the first woman and the first person of color to hold the office.
Well, I think if you talk to people around the vice president, and I have, I think they'll tell you there is a fundamental unfairness in the coverage here. And I think that there's been some commentary on that on Twitter and on shows like the one that we're on right here about that. Here's what I would take just a step back and ask the audience to think about. Most vice presidents credential their president. Again, let's look to Vice President Biden, credentialed Barack Obama in the Beltway. He was the trusted government hand. Barack Obama was the newcomer. Mike Pence credentialed Donald Trump. Mike Pence was the known quantity. Donald Trump was unknown. Dick Cheney credentialed George W. Bush. On and on and on. Really, for about the last 40 years, that has been the types of presidents and vice presidential pairings that we tend to go for in America. This is different. Really, the only historical comp for Kamala Harris is Dan Quayle. As a vice president who does not bring that kind of credentialing to their president, what she does bring is coalition building. She's a trusted partner in terms of building and sustaining coalitions. Remember, Kamala Harris completed Joe Biden's coalition during the 2020 presidential campaign by securing a lot of progressive support and, of course, strong support within the African-American community. So this is a different pairing than we are used to with presidents and vice presidents in recent history.
Right. Still, Joel, one of Harris's own political allies sees something a bit more malicious at play, telling CNN the reports are sexist and claim the media is even trying to end her career in a similar way in which it turned against Hillary Clinton. Do you see that as the case?
I think the coverage is a bit breathy, is the word that I would use, and I think that it can be a little hyperventilating. Look, we're 11 months into a presidency. The thing that's on most of the minds of the American people is not what Kamala Harris is or is not doing. What most American people care about is what's the cost of groceries, what's the cost of gas, is President Biden delivering on what he said he would deliver on when he took the oath of office. I think the vice president is way down the list of concerns, and I think it is important, again, just to put everything in context that we're still very early in this administration. You could be looking at a year at a very expanded and a very different role for Vice President Harris. I think in regards to whether or not there is some coding going on here and whether or not she is being unfairly critiqued, Obviously, I think it's upon all of us to consider that this is an audacious thing that she's attempting, that this is a historic thing that she's attempting. We've never experienced this. So we don't know what it is to judge someone like Kamala Harris in this position. We don't know what it is to judge a woman in this position or a black woman in this position. I think those are things important to keep in mind. I don't know if I would become paralyzed by that in the analysis of the situation.
Right, and it's also important to remember that almost every vice president throughout history, I'm sure there have been some exceptions, is an ambitious political animal as well, right? And so, of course, the person who's holding that office usually harbors expectations for something bigger down the line, usually the presidency. So, of course, the question will be, from her perspective or from her staffer's perspective, what has the White House done, to highlight the vice president's role within this administration? And is that going to be enough to give voters confidence in her abilities as a leader and potential presidential candidate come 2024 or 2028?
And so I think that's another important point, too. One of the reasons why this is so unique of a position that she's in is because we have President Biden, who is an older gentleman, who's the oldest president we've had inaugurated. There's a lot of talk about, well, will he run again if he chooses to run again in 2024? All indications are that he will right now. But we're literally talking about somebody that at any moment could become president of the United States. And I don't say that dismissively or disrespectfully of the president. That's just the reality of having a president at this advanced stage and having a vice president who is clearly being set up as a successor, as an heir to be the standard bearer of the Democratic Party. And that's also a unique challenge that she's got, is how do I keep and manufacture a political apparatus that can one day run a national campaign and be the standard bearer of the Democratic Party and run a 50-state campaign while still being a loyal and kind of subservient vice president. It's a tough challenge. By the way, they've also given her some very difficult issues to focus on. The crisis at the border, cybersecurity. I think that there are a lot of good intentions, and my sense is that some of the tension that we're seeing here will be worked out and will be smoothed out, and we might be having a different conversation about Vice President Harris come early next year.
All right. Well, Joel Payne, thank you so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.